Good morning, everyone. I'm Pia De Saleni, the President and Executive Director of Global Institute of Church Management. As we get ready here, we're just going to take a few minutes. I know it takes a few seconds for people to log in. Feel free to use the chat box at the bottom of your screen to let us know where you're from. It's always fun to hear where you're from. We're also going to be taking specific questions at the end. So if at any point during the webinar you would like to submit a question, just do so in the Q&A box. So it's better to do it in the Q&A box than the chat. The chat is literally just a chat. Let us know that you're here and tell us a little bit about yourself. We love hearing about you. I want to take this time. It looks like we're getting ready, loading up our participants. So this has been a really busy time, and I'm very grateful in particular to David Murphy from the Fitzgerald Institute of Real Estate at Notre Dame. We've been working on this series. So the series, as many of you may recall, last year was financial transparency in the Catholic Church. And this year we've turned the focus to managing the assets of the Catholic Church. Now, these first four from September through December are going to focus on real estate. There's a couple of reasons for this. First of all, real estate is a very timely and untapped subject. We all know that there are problems, but what we're finding, particularly David at the Fitzgerald Institute, is that there are a lot of creative solutions. So what we want to be talking about are the solutions and how we can maximize the real estate of the church. Now, we're also strategic because we're looking forward to a conference in Rome from February 7th through 9th that will be available both in person and virtually. We're confirming those details, so don't hold me to every detail, but hopefully we'll be able to get those details confirmed within the next month. We should have on the website, if we don't already, we should have a link to the event itself so that you can sign up to get current information as we're confirming. I'm very excited. Last month, I was in Rome to help launch our 5th edition of Program of Church Management with the first 2 weeks of intensives. And I was able to meet with Cardinal Pell. The first week he actually offered Mass for all of the PCM students in St. Peter's, along with the faculty who were present. So that was just an incredible blessing. And then I met with him later, and he agreed to be our opening keynote for the February conference. So I think we're off to a really good start. We're getting some experts from around the world. And again, this is just going to be a first pass at addressing these issues. So these first 4 webinars are to get you excited about our conference in February. We hope you'll be able to join us, whether virtually or in person. And again, on our website, if we don't have it now, we should very soon have a link where you can sign up for ongoing updates and information. I'm going to hand it over to David. So David's the program director for the Church Property Initiative at the Fitzgerald Institute. And again, what we found is that the church is the largest landowner in the world and doesn't act like it. The other thing that we found is that they're just incredible opportunities for evangelization, where we want to highlight the examples of individuals and institutions who understand that intersection between evangelization and property. The Holy Father Pope Francis keeps talking about the encounter. Well, guess what? The encounter has to happen in a space, in a physical space. And there's so much more that could be said about physicality, but we'll hold off until the conference for that. So David is going to be helping me out with the moderating today. He'll be introducing our panelists and leading the discussion. I might jump in a little bit. Our format is the usual format. We'll go about 40 minutes with just discussion. And again, this is a fluid conversation. It's not an academic conversation. We really want to hear about the successes and the challenges that our panelists have faced, and because we can all learn from them. And then at the end of that, we'll have about 12 to 15 minutes for Q&A. So again, be sure to put your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. On my screen, it's at on the right. So, but anyway, it is there. Let us know, answer your questions. Some of the speakers might be able to roll in an answer to your question before the Q&A period. That's why it's really key, just stream of consciousness, just let us have your questions. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, David. Thank you very much. And again, it's great to see you all here. We're a little bit short-staffed, so we haven't been able to get the videos up, but we will be doing that, I promise you, in the very near future. And if you want, you can add that to your prayer list, that we can get that organized with some great staff. But the content, I think, is amazing. And I want to thank all of our panelists for being here. And thank you, David, for facilitating the conversation.
Yes, and thank you, Pia. It's great to be with you. Good morning from South Bend. I know we probably cover a lot of time zones here. I'm seeing a lot of, I've got Reno, I've got Philippines. We're kind of all over the place. So wherever you are, it's great to be with you. And I'm thrilled to announce our three panelists. So today's conversation will be about the role of the rural church. So oftentimes, especially in headlines and in popular culture and imagination, the church is often seen in a very urban setting. So we hear about the Archdiocese of Chicago is closing over 100 parishes. All across Europe, we have kind of these dense urban cores where people see and understand the problem that the church is facing. I was just in Rome with Pia, and you can't go a block without running into at least one church. And so it's kind of a much more tangible, palpable question. But we want to make sure that in our discussion on this, we don't overlook the incredible role that the church plays in more rural areas of the world. So to help kind of talk about those conversations in depth from personal experience and years of experience, we're joined by three phenomenal panelists. So we're joined by James Ennis, the Executive Director of the Catholic Rural Life, Father Mike Samaniego, the CFO of the Archdiocese of Lipa in the Philippines, and by President Steve MINNIS of Benedictine College. And so we're very excited to have them here. And just to kind of begin the conversation and open it, we're going to turn to James Ennis. And James, if you wouldn't mind just giving a kind of a quick overview of your work with Catholic Rural Life, the history of Catholic Rural Life maybe, and just kind of setting the stage for specific rural life challenges and opportunities that you've seen in your work.
Thank you, David. I've been the Executive Director for Catholic Rural Life for 13 years, but our organization is 98 years old. We were founded by Father Edwin V. O'Hara, who grew up on a farm in rural Minnesota, was ordained in 1905, and he ended up becoming a chaplain in World War I. And there on the front lines, working with these soldiers, many of them from rural communities in the United States, he was amazed that many of them were Catholic, but they didn't know their Catholic faith. So when he came back to the United States in the teens, he talked to his archbishop and said, I want to start an organization that would really help evangelize rural communities in the United States. And he formed the National Catholic Rural Life Conference in 1923. So our organization has been around for 98 years, promoting Catholic life in rural America. So we do that in a lot of different ways. One of our more recent programs is called Thriving in Rural Ministry, where we work with pastors across the country. And we bring exemplary model priests who are really doing beautiful things in rural, working with the challenges they have. They serve multiple parishes. Evangelization is so needed. Often these priests are overworked, spread very thin, but we bring them together for fellowship. As iron sharpens iron, we share best practices, and we also help them to have a vision for the care of creation as well, and to really talk about integral ecology and Laudato Si. So we've been doing this over the last 3 years. It's been phenomenal. We've had over 75 priests involved from 40 parishes across the United States, and it's growing. But the need is great. A lot of churches are closing in rural, and so we have a lot of rectories and other buildings available. And so it's how to repurpose those, thinking creatively, but also thinking creatively of how to bring Catholic ministers into rural, lay ministers, thinking of youth workers and other things. So there's a lot of really exciting opportunities in the future that I see. And again, we work nationally and we're in 42 states. So it's been a fantastic journey so far.
Wow, fantastic. And our next panelist for an intro is Father Mike Samaniego. Again, joining us, I believe it's 10 p.m. You're 12 hours ahead of me, Father Mike. all the way from Lipa in the Philippines. And so, Father Mike, can you give us a quick background on your role in as the CFO and how some of the real estate challenges that have presented themselves in your diocese and how you've solved them in a really innovative way? Oh, Father Mike, you're on mute.
Okay.
There we
It's
go.
working now. There we go. Sorry. I became an Oeconomo, or a finance administrator of the diocese, year 2011. And then one of the challenges that we had to face then was the inadequacy of funds to support the needs of the local church, the curia, the ministries that we have, the seminaries, and the support for the old and sick priests. Now, year after year, our expenses to rise, but our source resources, or the revenues that we have, remain the same, which mostly came from donations, like any other churches. The situation prodded us to seek for new avenues of growing our revenues. This brought us to the idea of improving our real estate asset utilization. Now, the first step that we did was to do an inventory of all the properties with the objective of monetizing the use of these spaces by leasing. When we have completed the inventory, that was the time we identified the areas that are leasable and that are due for rental income. Then we invited the potential lessees. Today, we have 41 lessees, all of which were carefully selected. And we took into consideration the brand and the prospect of co-branding with this organization, their capacity to pay, and the most important, we looked into the business coverage to see that what they have did not conflict with the values of the Catholic Church. That's how we did it.
Wow, that's super exciting, and one of the things we'll circle back and kind of deep dive into that, Father Mike. But I do want to introduce our last panelist, President Steve MINNIS of the Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas. We're thrilled to have you joining us this morning, and if you wouldn't mind giving a quick overview, maybe of describing Atchison, describing the role of Benedictine College and some of the challenges and opportunities that you faced in a rural community.
Sure, thank you. And thank you for having me. So I've been the president here for 17 years. I'm a graduate of the college, so this is my alma mater. We're in Atchison, Kansas, which is a town of about 11,000. It's a rural area, although it is relatively close to Kansas City, about 45 minutes. But we're on the Kansas and Missouri border. I always tell the story for Americans. We were founded 3 years before the Civil War on the Kansas and Missouri border, so not a great place to start anything, okay, right? But the monks start a school for the Lord's service. One of the things that has impacted us is that we've had our enrollment's really grown. We have over 2,000 full-time undergraduates, and that's double, the enrollment's doubled in 15 years. So what that means is that whenever and we're a residential school. So what we have to do is we have to find ways to build more dorms all the time. And the way we do that is designated certain assets as revenue producing and non-revenue producing. So an academic building would be non-revenue producing, but a dormitory residence hall where you have 120 students off campus, not paying us room and board. If you bring them onto campus, now all of a sudden you can collect room and board. And so what we do is we take out bond issues, we take out debt that is paid off through the room and board rates of those that are now living in that new dorm. So that's how we have financed all this growth and the ability to build new dorms.
And President MINNIS, could you unpack that a little bit more? I know that you had an opportunity where there was a hospital in downtown Atchison that was relocating. Can you kind of give a quick overview of that story and kind of give some insight on how that played into that model you just described?
Sure. So we had a hospital across the street from the campus, and it was aged. I mean, it was built in 1912, added on in 36 and 45. So it was an older building. About 12 years ago, the CEO of the hospital came into my office and said, hey, we plan to build a new hospital south of town, a new modern hospital. And we were wondering if you were interested in the 4 buildings and 10 acres that's right across the street from your campus. And originally I said, well, gosh, we can't really buy those from you. And he says, no, I'm going to give those to you. And in fact, if you want to tear the hospital down, we'll pay for half the demolition. So we thought to ourselves, oh gosh, we're going to be like the dog that caught the bus. I don't know what we're going to do with all this stuff. But what a great opportunity for the college to get that. And not only that, but we were growing not only our student body, but our programs. And right now we would not have nursing or engineering, which is 2 programs that we started in the last 15 years, if we wouldn't have received this property. One of the pieces of the property that we received was an office building for a doctor's office as one of the 4 buildings. And so we looked at that building and we said to ourselves, okay, well, you know what? We were going to start it nursing, and we said, let's make that our nursing building. So we gutted that building and turned it into a nursing center. We named it after Mother Teresa, and it's really a fantastic thing. How we funded that was that we also at the same time built a new dormitory. So we were able to take out a bond issue, and not only did the bond issue pay for the new dorm, but the room rates for the students living in that dorm, because interest rates had decreased so much, that we were also able to pay for fund the renovations of that building to make it our Mother Teresa Nursing Center.
And one last question for you, Steve, on this round. Can you describe maybe the role of, Atchison is a town of about 11,000 people. It's in kind of that border state area you were describing. Can you talk about the role that you can play as kind of an economic engine that fits into this broader community of a more rural part of the country?
That's a really great question. We've been really blessed. We're the major growth engine for the city right now. We're one of the few organizations that's growing, and we continue to grow. As I said, our enrollment's doubled, which also means that our employees have doubled in the last 15 years. So all of a sudden you have all these new employees and relatively highly compensated for this rural area coming to Atchison, buying homes. In addition to that, we've also, just because of the spiritual nature and the intellectual nature that comes from the university here, is that we've also been able to attract young Catholic families to Atchison, Kansas that don't work at the college, but because of the new way of doing business, many people are working virtually now. They're able to come to Atchison, raise their families, buy homes here, and now it raises the entire profile of the city. It brings more and new life and all that. So it's not just employees of the college, but it's also the ancillary folks that come because of the college. Maybe their son or daughter went here, and so they just fell in love with the community and they wanted to raise the rest of their family here. So that's happening. We've had literally 8 families in the last 7 months move to Atchison, Kansas from Albuquerque, Phoenix, Dallas, Kansas City, sold their homes there and moved to Atchison, none of whom will work for us, but they had a connection with the college. So this is all the boats are rising here. So it's exciting.
Wow. And Father Mike, in your role in the Philippines, can you also speak to the effect that the church kind of providing this economic engine is in the same way that it was for President MINNIS, speaking to the positive effects both for the church and maybe the local communities that are indeed rural where you are through your efforts to lease some of these properties?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. Remember, I was telling you about we were dealing with our corporations, but it was really tempting to deal always with big organizations with branded products. We needed also to provide space for the small stores. It meant giving them the opportunity to grow their own businesses, local entrepreneurs. This is aligned with our mission of extending help to those who are in need and giving them the tools to be more productive. We classified our properties with prime properties and non-prime properties. The non-prime properties were leased to farmers to grow their vegetables, to grow their corn. The prime properties were leased to branded corporations, mostly in the cities, but in the suburbs, we have the farmers, we have small stores in the area. That's what we did in the Philippines, yeah, in our area.
And can you speak to Father Mike, how does the revenue generated impact, does it go directly back to operations for the church?
Oh, the annual gross earnings from the leased properties is around 300,000 US. For perspective, the minimum wage in the Philippines is around $10 to $12, not per hour, not like US. It's per day. So 300,000 US is big for us. That is 30% of our annual budget, the budget of the diocese.
Wow.
And that's for the seminary, for the curia, it's distributed to the ministries. Yes.
That's fantastic. We had an answer from, or a question from John Vidal, and he asked you if you had any challenges in centralizing and managing church assets and properties in Filipino parishes, which are traditionally under the direct authority of the individual pastor. Was it easy to gain cooperation and accountability?
Okay. There is, in canon law, there is a law on subsidiarity. I'm not a canon lawyer. This is what we did. If the property is in your parish, we give you half of the earning for you to use it for pastoral reason. But the half goes to the central office for the archdiocesan programs. That's what we did. It was difficult initially, but they were able to accept it. It should be that way. We have to come together so that we have to help each other to run the church. But it happens. Yes, it happens.
Great. James, I'm curious. So we've heard, obviously with Benedictine College, an economic engine, thousands of people, students attending. Father Mike's leasing dozens of properties, creating this. What are some of the challenges kind of more on the tangible, like immediate solutions that you work with on some of best properties, more on the these individual spread thin pastors who maybe don't have Father Mike as their CFO or Atchison, Kansas with Benedictine? What are some of the strategies and maybe some of the challenges that you faced on kind of this a small town, very rural, without some of these larger structures in place to provide support?
That's a great question. I think some of the things we're trying to do is, create a network across the country to share best practices, to share models that are working. And I'll give you an example. In rural Louisiana, I visited a small parish. This priest wanted to utilize their space. They had a community center. He opened it up for after-school programs to help youth, to bring youth off the street after school and do enrichment, education enrichment. And he made it open to the whole community, not just to Catholics, but the whole community. And he had a part-time youth minister, but he created this space to utilize it for educational purposes. And there are communities all over the country that are, the Catholic Church is the heart often of a community. It's the pulse, and it can really serve the community, not only in the spiritual needs, but also in some of the physical needs, educational needs. So there's really some creative pastors out there that we're working with, and laity, that we're sharing these models with others to give them inspiration, to give them fresh ideas in how to repurpose their spaces. But the idea of a rectory, say the churches, there have been 4 parishes within two small towns, and they have to close 2 of them. Well, they reuse those rectories for purposes for housing. And there's some really creative solutions that I've seen, but the church is at the heart of it. And they can also be, a draw, like President MINNIS said, of drawing people into the community. What we're seeing as trends is that young Catholic families are moving into rural, either to do homesteading or just to work from home, because of the pandemic, people can now work more virtually and also have a quality of life that they didn't have in a large urban center. So I'm seeing, multiple trends, but the glass is either half full or it's half empty. And I think we really have to inspire the next generation that it's half full. There are really beautiful opportunities, both in utilizing space, but also serving the community, like for educational needs and other spiritual needs of the community, that, working together, we can get some really beautiful things done that can re-evangelize these rural communities.
And maybe you could speak, I love the case study from Louisiana. I think that's amazing. How have you seen, your work in terms of that kind of glass half full, half empty? Is it oftentimes just a shift, when you have these priests on retreat that come talk to you, when you go out and visit these small communities, do you feel that it's a matter of the church just doesn't have the resources, or is it a matter of like a perception of, okay, we do have these rectories, we do have these resources, and it just takes a shift in how we think about using them?
I really want to be charitable. It's often, sometimes, when pastors are overworked, stretched very thin, their vision can be very closed in, just because they're just trying to survive. What we're trying to do is help provide support so that they can, have a broader vision and realize there are resources around that maybe they weren't aware of, or they didn't have the capacity, that you can share those resources and increase their vision. I mean, it's like Jesus, when he tells his disciples, look out in the fields, what do you see? And, he says, they're ripe, it's ripe for harvest. They don't see it, but he helped in life, after he had visited with the woman at the well, he said, there are so many needs out here, but we don't see it. But when we get a glimpse of it, like the example of President MINNIS, all of a sudden you go, oh my goodness, that's brilliant. And it was the Lord, it's the Lord providing, but us taking steps of faith to share, to broaden our vision. One of the things from the pastors, we had a group of pastors from all over the country last week. At the end, we had a sharing, and they said, I am energized after this retreat together. I can see now, I can see broader. I didn't even know Catholic Rural Life existed until my bishop said, go to this retreat. And, all of a sudden, it really is a support, and we need each other. We need all the gifts and charisms that are represented in this panel, but throughout the world, to really have an impact in rural communities, because rural communities, that's where our food comes from. That's, often they're at the tip of the spear from an environmental standpoint. There are a lot of really big needs right now in rural.
I'm curious, I loved the idea of kind of cutting through the different silos of the church, and both sometimes it's just internal to its own organization, but sometimes it's collaborating with other partners. And I'm curious, for all three of our panelists, if you have any thoughts or experience on your kind of favorite story of cutting through these different silos, be it within your own diocese or parish or college, or if it is kind of creating some of these networks beyond. So James, maybe that's in other rural countries or communities. I'm not sure, Father Mike, if you've talked to other CFOs, or President MINNIS, if you collaborated with any other Catholic educators or anything like that. I'm curious, just how are good examples of you guys cutting through these silos?
In the Philippines, we have an organization of all finance administrators of the diocese. It's diocesan finance administrators of the Philippines. Every year we have a convention and we discuss these things. So this is nothing new in the Philippines, the leasing thing, because we discuss this often. Almost every year, we discuss the opportunities to grow money so that we can use it in our pastoral concerns, in the pastoral direction of the dioceses. We have that.
Have you found that your model has been well received or replicated or done in other places?
Yes, in many dioceses in the Philippines. This is not something new. This is not something special in the Philippines. This is done by the dioceses. Almost all of us are doing this. The dioceses, yes. We have a lot of opportunities to exchange notes because we have an organization of all priests who are finance administrators. Some even went to PCM. Yeah, I met them at PCM.
And for those who don't know, PCM is the Project of Church Management at the Pontifical University of Santa Croce, that works with a lot of people from around the world on these kinds of issues.
I was going to follow up real quick, David, on Jim's comment about the importance of the rural church. And I don't know if anybody's read this book called Alienated America by Tim Carney, which is a very, very interesting book. And it's not just about America, but it's also about around the world. And in the end, he says those folks that feel alienated, and at least for Americans, did not believe in the American dream, that it was because they lacked community, and specifically faith-based communities, that caused them to feel alienated and not part of something, and not really believing in the American dream anymore, as the Americans would define that. But so keeping it, in fact, you could see the downturn of a community as soon as the churches left. When the churches left, the communities just dropped, and it just became just terrible, right? And you see this in other studies as well. But what Jim is saying is very important, that we find every way we can to maintain our churches in rural areas. Otherwise, those communities will not be successful. And so I think that's really important. Thanks, Jim.
And David, thank you, President MINNIS. And David, I just want to build on what's been said. I think networking is really important, not to be in silos. And so I work with Catholic universities. I want to work with President MINNIS, but we also, in all seriousness, it's through, I think, an openness to learn from each other, to learn that we're a part of the body of Christ, and we can't do it all by ourselves. And we need the hands, the feet, the eyes, the nose, all those insights and expertises can really help us. And I'm president of the International Catholic Rural Association based out of Rome. And so we have convenings, and they're convenings to really share what are the challenges in rural all over the world, but also what are ways that we can address it as church, as the body of Christ, in both the spiritual, physical, educational needs. So what can we do? And often it's learning about each other's experiences and then connecting them with experts, those who can help address the particular issues in their particular part of the world. So I do think, this panel is, in all seriousness, is really vital to continue to reimagine how we can utilize space, for instance. But the church is the heart and soul, I believe, and we need to continue to be thinking and praying about how we can move forward together, and what are some of those effective ways, whether it's rural United States, or it's rural Philippines, or it's rural Uganda, wherever we find ourselves, that we need to do this in a creative way. So I think breaking down silos is really critical. And I work with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, so we work across all the dioceses that serve rural to brainstorm and to talk about it at a bishop's level, but also at a parish level, and then at a laity level. And not that we're working across lines. We bring folks together to brainstorm and to then act. And so I really applaud your efforts on this particular issue around real estate.
One question. Oh, go ahead, President MINNIS, if you were going to hop in.
I was just going to follow up, because I wanted to follow up on something Father Mike said, which I thought was really significant too, is that all of the use of your buildings, all the uses still have to be consistent with the teachings of the church. Otherwise,
Definitely.
it's inappropriate. I think that's very, very important as well. I was going to just tell a quick story about this Mother Teresa Nursing Center, which kind of goes in line with him. When we got that building and we were going to put our nursing program in there, and we asked ourselves, okay, what are we going to name this building? We looked at patron saint of nurses, and nothing really grabbed our imagination. Then we said, guys, Mother Teresa is not a nurse, but what a great caregiver. So we're going to let's name this building after Mother Teresa. So I told a buddy of mine who worked with Mother Teresa, and he said, well, now, have you gotten approval from the Missionaries of Charity? And I said, well, no. And he said, well, they'll sue you, okay, if you use Mother Teresa's name without approval. I thought to myself, okay, this is going to be great. I'm going to sit at council table in court, with all these women in white saris suing me. Okay. So I thought this isn't going to turn out very well for the college. So I wrote a letter to Missionaries of Charity asking for approval. They wrote back literally a typewriter written letter that said, we've heard many great things about Benedictine College, and we know that you're launching a pro-life nursing program. And as long as your nursing program is continue to support pro-life causes and you produce pro-life nurses, we'll allow you to use Mother Teresa's name on the building. Okay, so just like Father Mike, what he requires, this is what's required of us. This was easy for us to agree to this, of course, but I thought it was really important, and it's an important thing now to put on our wall. We put it in the nursing center, so every nursing student that walks into that building sees that and recognizes what we're all about. So I thought that was kind of a neat story.
Actually, that's one of the challenges that we had and we are still facing now. How do we ensure that the use of the property will not go against the teachings of the church? We made sure that a provision in the contract, there is a provision in the contract to that effect. Let me share a very short story. There was this big brand in the Philippines which was willing to lease our property near our cathedral for a price we can't get from smaller players. The amount that they were willing to pay and the potential rental appreciation of our nearby stalls because of their presence only as a lead lessee was almost guaranteed. However, the store sells contraceptives. If it were just for money, it would have been an excellent business decision on our part. But we know very well that it is not all about money. We had to say no and to their application and their offer. That's very recent.
That's a striking example, and a question for all three panelists. Sometimes it's when operating in these areas where you guys have such a front row seat to desperate challenges. Maybe it's one pastor who's stretched thin in a Texas oil town. Maybe it's relationships with the town of Atchison or these leasing questions. So often it can be, the church real estate can be focused on square footage or price or some of these things. For each of you, how have you found a way to kind of keep rooted in your work from a spiritual perspective, to ensure that it's not just a business question at the end of the day? I'm curious how to, maybe a more personal side of just how is it, is it prayer? Is it experiencing like the fruits of these retreats? I'm sure for you, James, just to see the priests come together. How for each of you do you keep your work rooted in not just name only of the church, but kind of truly the faith alive in your personal life?
For me, it's just going back always to the mission. What is why am I doing this? What is the purpose of what I'm doing? Why are we getting into a business like this? It's the purpose. The purpose of wealth is to love. So at the end of the day, it's all about loving these people, using the money that we are able to raise to touch base with the needy, to touch base with those who are in need at the end of the day. It's not for our own growth, it is for the growth of the church. It's going back to the mission, the purpose why we are doing it.
I know for me personally, Christ, Jesus has transformed my life, and Pope Francis often says this about missionary disciples. You can't share what you don't have, and to really be close to Christ, to be close to the Eucharist, to allow Christ to transform us, and then to be open to his calls. What is he calling us to? And really is to share and to reach out to all about the good news of Christ and his redemption and the joy of the gospel, that there's a joy here. And often in rural communities, especially in the United States, often they don't feel the joy anymore. They're feeling like they're beaten down because the business is hard, or there's a drought, or there's a fire, or there's all kinds of different challenges in just life, but a lot of brokenness. So personally, to be renewed every morning, every day with Christ is the only way I can get through it. And prayer, and also the community of saints and priests like Father Mike, who inspire, who have faith, and also can share the sacramental life and participate in that is vital for me.
Many people will ask me in the last 15 years or so, what's caused this? So why have you been so blessed? Why all this success, and why now, at Benedictine College? And our answer is pretty simple. We looked at two things. Number one is we embraced Our Lady. We consecrated the college to her. I've consecrated myself to her as well, and put my life in the college's hands, in her hands. And the second thing that we did is we embraced our mission, and so being leading a mission-driven organization makes you mission-driven as well. Okay, our mission to educate within a community of faith and scholarship. And we have a monk that says, "Are you willing to go bankrupt for your beliefs? Are you willing to go bankrupt for your beliefs?" And we kind of think that if your beliefs are true, and the answer to that question is yes, that you'll never go bankrupt. Father Mike just told a story that having that entity, that organization lease their building from them was a better financial decision than not having them do that.
Yes.
Father Mike was willing to go bankrupt for his beliefs, and I really appreciate that. So that's what we're willing to do too.
Kind of as a follow-up to that, obviously personally, the other thing too is, especially for Father Mike, maybe with, leasing a building to a secular company, a big brand, or, how have each of you, I guess, seen both the physical property and a building kind of lead to not necessarily just fiscal capital, but maybe a good story of how it's led to true evangelization, and maybe that is just through the funds providing for operations for the seminary. But Father Mike, I know you have like more rural, leasing land for farmers and things like this. Have you seen opportunities where the physical space becomes a true encounter for someone with Christ?
I guess for our lessees, just understanding their needs and providing for what they need is part of evangelization. The pandemic has immensely affected the sales of our lessees. Look at this. Some even had to close because of the imposed lockdown in our area. We addressed that by sharing the pain. We shared the pain with them. Rental payments were suspended during the time of lockdown, and discounts on rent were offered to lessen the burden or the business burden. Term payments for rent were likewise extended. I guess this is the most Christian way of doing it. It is sharing the pain with them. They are in pain, so we will share the pain with them. I guess that is one way of evangelizing also. It is just being with them and holding each other's hand to go through this pandemic. I think that is a good example of this.
That's great. Yeah.
I was going to give just kind of a quick example about trying to live your mission. We were approached by a shoe company to be sponsored, have our athletic team sponsored by them. Okay. And it would have saved us a lot of money. 40% of everything that we purchased would have been, that would have been the deal. It was really a great opportunity. This first time that they were going to sponsor small schools, okay, rather than large schools. And we had a lot of pressure to do that. We discovered that this institution, this company had been donating money to Planned Parenthood, okay? And so we said to ourselves, well, is it worth it? Okay, so we're spending more money on our equipment and our uniforms right now than we could have. But, what was important? The mission's a lot more important than so we decided not to be sponsored by that entity, and we feel a lot better about that, even though we had a ton of pressure to do it. So.
Wow.
In our case, James.
No, Father Mike, go ahead. Finish the thought.
In our case, it's a no-brainer. If it is against the values of the church, we don't deal with the company anymore. If they are running if the organization runs against the teachings of the church, no, we don't deal with them. Go ahead, James.
Well, just going back to your question, David, about there's some examples, at least in my experience in rural, some pastors and churches have a lot of land. And so what they've done is often open that to gardeners and work to create and to grow food for the local food shelves, for the local folks who need it. And it's actually, there's a network of different parishes that are doing this. And it really is outstanding, because I just heard a witness of this a couple days back where, you know, the communities rallied around this market garden, and you know, others in the town see it, and they know where those fruits and vegetables are going, and they're going to the local food shelf. And it's a witness, an outward witness of something. You know, the land is there, the churches own this land, and then they make it available. There's another example, and this is in rural Louisiana, where this one pastor had the vision. He was a Filipino pastor, and what he had a vision to do was to use some of the land on their parish property and create a huge garden. And he hired, you know, prisoners who had just come out of prison and needed a resume. And he'd hire them for 6 to 8 months to work the land, help other experts in his parish work with these particular men and women who could then, you know, develop a resume, have some work experience, and then help them find jobs. And then they connected with the local restaurant in the larger town to source those fruits and vegetables. And it's just it's a beautiful witness to the local community, but also to really meet the needs for employment, for developing some job skills and some job history. So I think there's some real creative ways how to utilize property, whether it be the buildings or the land, to be a witness to the community. And that is, you know, again, something very tangible that men and women can see that the church is doing, meeting genuine needs.
That's an awesome use, and it actually tees up well. We're kind of going into the Q&A section from the people who are answering questions, and that, James, you must have read ahead. That teed it up perfectly for answering. Both Andrew and Emily had asked. You know, we talked about, you know, President MINNIS with the, you know, the school and the getting the hospital buildings and providing for engineering. We've talked a lot about buildings. Father Mike with leasing structures to different brands that are kind of on church property. For all of you, how have you seen the land viewed, not just necessarily as buildings, but are there case studies like you mentioned, James, with the actual land itself being either leased to other farmers or being used, you know, maybe in a way that's not necessarily just a revenue source from leasing a specific structure, but maybe innovative funds, be that maybe it's oil or solar, or, you know, some of these other kind of opportunities. Actually, and Father Mike, I think you have some interesting ones with cell towers.
Yeah, we have. For the not so prime properties, we lease them to telecommunications, because they need the area for the towers. That's the only thing that we do. We were thinking of, long before, we're thinking of leasing them to solar corporations or company, but we haven't done that yet. That's part of what we are thinking now. And, you know, there is an interested, I think there is an interested company that would like to lease the roofs of the churches for solar power. That I remember it was in one of our discussions, because we have the largest roof in the Philippines, yeah, all of the churches. But we haven't done that yet. That's part of what we're planning to do.
We have a network of men and religious communities who are located in rural communities around the country. And some of these will lease their land or utilize, work with local farmers to lease some of their land, but also use some of their land as a training around best practices in environmental responsibility. So Brother Nick Renner, who's in rural Ohio, and he's an agronomist by training, but he works with the Ohio State University and uses the property of the religious order he's a part of to share with other farmers how to reduce erosion and having a lot of chemicals go into lakes that cause all kinds of problems. So he's doing this, and he's doing this through a network of farmers who are surrounding their land. And then he works with the Ohio State University's Extension Service, which is an educational service for farmers and rural communities, and is just doing a marvelous work. So they're leasing some of the land for revenue. They're using some of their other land for training and practices. And then another religious community, and this also happens to be in rural Ohio, but in a different diocese, they're using their land to show about, talk about sustainable living and sustainable practices. So this women religious order brings school kids from the local towns, and they come out and they have all kinds of different exhibits and educational opportunities for the children to learn about sustainable practices, whether that's in agriculture, gardening, or in other areas of sustainability. So there are some real creative ways to be educational and not provocative, but really help stimulate some, and working with local educational institutions around how can we grow food and sustain the land for the future. And so these are some models that I've witnessed in different parts of the country.
You know, I want to circle back just briefly, David, about talking about buildings for a second, because I think there's some folks that are doing some really creative things. We have, when kids graduate from college, they have, you know, loan situations and things like that, but they want to serve many times. And many of our education majors want to teach in Catholic schools, but you know, housing and food are two big items that they're concerned about. We have a parish in St. Joe, Missouri, that owned a couple houses across the street, and that what they've done is in order to recruit teachers to their Catholic grade school, they've opened those houses up for those teachers to move there. They're single typically, and they'll have a girl's house and a guy's house, and so then all of a sudden they have free room, and then the parish provides food. So they have free room and board basically for the time that they're teaching at that Catholic grade school. So it's a really unique thing. Jim was just talking about, there's a lot of rural parishes that have housing now available because they only need one rectory, but they have 2 or 3 different parishes. So this is a great opportunity to recruit youth ministers or other opportunities, and all of a sudden you can provide free housing. And if you can work out a system where you provide free food as well, oh my gosh, now you have an opportunity to recruit some folks to your place that may not normally have come, but it's such a great opportunity for them now. So those are things to think about.
That's great. And that actually touches, Isaac had asked a question kind of similar to that of what to do with some of these structures. And I think that, again, kind of solving, you know, again, we get back to silos of, you know, oftentimes it's like, well, the rectory and the parish is sometimes not talking with, you know, the idea of a school, or some of the challenges of recruiting and retaining Catholic school teachers or youth ministers, or some of these other critical areas, you know, for furthering the church and its evangelization mission for the youth. And so you can kind of start using real estate to combine and say, hey, you know, we can figure this out. We can structure it well to where, you know, we use this empty kind of liability of an empty rectory or something and turn it into an asset that actually activates the whole community and, you know, raises the whole, the rising tide for the whole community of using an underutilized resource. And so I think that's fantastic. let's see, James, were you going to chime in, James? I think I might have caught you off. I know you had unmuted.
No, I'm fine. That was excellent. Thank you.
Yes. And so I know we're just coming up at the end of time. I'd love to kind of leave on a high note. If we could just kind of run through the panelists and say, we've talked a lot about the history of the different organizations. You know, we have Catholic Rural Life that goes back 98 years. I hope you have a great 100-year birthday party planned. And, you know, the kind of the origin stories on this. Maybe for each of your perspectives, say, maybe talk to the future a little bit of saying something that you're really excited about for where your specific organization or role is going to, and what is exciting about that. So we'll leave on a positive high note.
Okay. For me first, moving forward, this is what we intend to do and what we are doing now. In the way we do, just to situate you, the way we do our budget in the Archdiocese, we allocate 20% of our budget to addressing the future for sustainability reason. To make the money grow, a portion of the amount is reinvested still in real estate, but not without utilizing the resources of the church. Because very recently, I know you have this in America and you have this in Europe. Very recently, an investment instrument was launched in the Philippines. It is called Real Estate Investment Trust, or REIT. Now, the product allows us to participate in earnings of listed companies for leasing. A real estate, or REIT, REIT is a company that owns and in most cases operates income-producing real estate. We buy shares from these companies and we get regular dividends, which we also use for the pastoral concerns of the diocese. That's where we at right now, because the properties of the church are finite. So we have to diversify now and look for other sources. That's what we're doing now.
Great.
What we're excited about at Benedictine College is this new strategic vision we have to transform culture. And we think that culture, this is a time in our history where culture needs to be transformed. And we think that through our mission of community, building communities, having strong faith, and having an academic, being lifelong learners, has the ability to transform culture. You know, we're in an era of loneliness and polarization. So community is always the answer to that. And we're in this age of hopelessness and incivility. We see that all the time. Faith is the answer to that, this gospel message of love. And finally, we're in a no truth era where we're information rich, but analysis poor. Scholarship is the answer to that. So if we can take community, faith, and scholarship with our students, but in other ways out to the greater world, that culture can be transformed. So that's what we're excited about.
And at Catholic Rural Life, as you said, we're going to be celebrating a 100-year anniversary in a couple of years, but we really, our mission is to promote Catholic life in rural America. We'd love to see flourishing parishes, families, and farmers. And we want to share that too internationally through our role at the International Catholic Rural Association, and really provide hope and provide a message that Christ is still he's the answer to our brokenness, but also he inspires through his Holy Spirit new ideas of how to utilize space, how to create beauty, and to speak truth and to do good in these rural areas that need it so much. But we have to work together. And I noticed a lot of your questions from viewers would take another hour to answer, but I think it's really fantastic that you've got this network going that you've built, David. And so thank you very much for what you all are doing.
Yes, and we're right on time. And as James said, I know that we didn't get to unpack all answers specifically. Thank you so much for sharing. And please feel free for both the panelists and for the people joining us to keep us, both Notre Dame in my role, Pia in her roles, and all three panelists, both in your prayers, but also in mind of as you experience this, if you have questions, if you have stories that you'd like to share of the church being effective in the rural areas. We have resources. We would love to get you connected. The Program of Church Management and the Global Institute for Church Management are both fantastic resources that are agile and adaptive for these specific questions, where you can get in a very concrete kind of set way in these 2-week intensives, tons of resources, tons of networks, to where it's so important. Again, you're not alone wherever you are in the world. You're part of this global church, and we can learn from each other. So we can learn from the amazing work that these 3 panelists are doing, and that's our role. So it's been beautiful to see the different things. We've got people from all over the world here, and so hopefully that this platform going forward is not just a singular event for you guys to watch and say, wow, that was great, but hopefully this leads to action. This leads to the Holy Spirit at work, and fueling and lighting a spark that can help transform a rural farm in Africa or Nebraska and everywhere in between. So on behalf of Notre Dame and Global Institute, thank you, and I'll turn it over to Pia.
Great, thank you, David. Thanks so much for facilitating the conversation. Thanks to all of our panelists. I see there are a lot of questions that we still need to answer, and what we're going to be building into our website is when we host the video, we will do our best to answer these questions. There are some questions actually here that touch on legal, so I just want to mention, stay tuned. We're going to be talking about legal legacies in December and getting into the specifics of some of these legal questions. Additionally, just want to remind you that Thursday, October 11th, we will be doing our next webinar, and this is on urban real estate. I hope to be able to confirm the panelists next week. We'll get this going a little bit earlier, a little more leeway. Anything that you can do to help spread the word for us, we appreciate it. And as always, we welcome your feedback. And lastly, I just want to emphasize that we are looking forward to this real estate conference in February. There's a banner on the gicm.org website for it. It'll be February 7th through 9th in Rome. And we're actually going to turn that into a very unique intensive session for those who want to come to the conference and also do some intensive courses. We're going to add a day of executive level project planning and a day and a half of executive level change management. So this will be different from our normal intensive courses, which follow our curriculum. This is going to be specialized for people at an executive level. So those are people that have already served as a pastor or some leadership role for a sustained period. So we'll be publishing more information about that, but I just want to mention it to keep it out there, because if you're coming to Rome, we'd love to have you stay longer for some of these intensive sessions. So with that, I just want to thank you again all for your time, for your participation. Our participants, you have just been amazing. It's an incredible gift of your time and expertise. And as always, we look forward to hearing from any of you. Please send us your suggestions, questions, because we want to make these webinars as useful as possible for you. So with that, I'll say God bless and thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll see you in Rome, Pia.
Okay.
Bye.